Ooh, damn. That's a pretty nice looking car over there. I don't even know what it's doing out here in the middle of nowhere, but I don't think it would hurt if I tried to take this out for a spin. Alright, let's see if I can get on this car. Alright. Ooh, this is pretty nice. This is pretty nice. Let's see if I can take this for a spin. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, this is driving by pretty nice. Oh, I'm doing a little cartwheel over there. Okay. It's a little too chaotic, but let's see. Does this car have any other features? Can I, like, turn on the lights? Can I honk the horn? Let's see if I can try honking the horn. Maybe it would probably be the H key? Let's try that. Alright, let's think about what just happened for a minute. So, I was in this car, and I was able to press the H key to honk the horn, and also make it explode, apparently. But what matters is that context is what mattered when it came to pressing the H key, because I had to literally be in the car in order to press the H key. If I was out here pressing the H key, then nothing will happen because I'm not in the right context of sitting down in this car, being in the driver's seat, and being able to honk the horn that's inside of this car. So if I go into this car and then I try driving around, now that I'm in the driver's seat with the right context, I can then press the H key to do that, I guess. To honk the horn and make it explode. So this only happens when I'm in the car, and that's the only time I can press the H key. I'm pretty sure if I was in the car and then I stepped out of the car, then there would be no functionality with pressing the H key again. This only happens in the context of me being in the driver's seat of the car. And when I stepped out of the car, I was no longer able to do the action of pressing the H key to honk the horn. And so that's pretty much what this is. This kind of seems like a continuation from my user input service video that I made previously, and that is essentially what this is. This is user input service, but this time we're adding context to when the player can press down a certain input or key or whatever it may be in order to do things with certain actions. So with that being said, now let's get to implementing this inside of our Roblox game. Now that we understand it, let's start implementing user input during specific context that matters most when we need to. So how we're going to do this is we're going to use a local script, much like we did in user input service, to be able to detect user input. And this is a local sided only feature. So let's go to the right side in starter player and starter character scripts, and let's hit the plus sign to add a new local script. So let's delete this, and let's first make reference to our new service called ContextActionService. This is what we're going to be using. So we're going to say local ContextActionService equals game::get_service ContextActionService. All right, and so for right now, I'm going to show you a really basic example of detecting user input based on a function that ContextActionService provides, and this is going to be called BindAction. So we need to be able to define what function that needs to be executed when we press a certain key, and be able to make this key pressable to do a certain action. So we're going to do that by saying ContextActionService::BindAction, and this takes in roughly about 4 parameters. So the first one is the action name, and this is pretty much what we're going to name the action when we press a certain key or have some sort of specific input. We're going to call this pressed E. And then for our second argument, we're going to pass in a function that will execute this action when we do the action that we specified, which in this case, it's going to be pressing E. So we're actually going to need to create a new function before we call BindAction. So let's drop 2 lines from the first line, and let's create a new function. We're going to call this local function press E, open and close parentheses, enter. Now, here's the interesting thing about BindAction. When we pass in a function to bind for our second argument, it's going to pass in 3 arguments, but there's only really 2 that matters to us. And the first argument that it's going to automatically pass is going to be the action name itself. So we're going to call this parameter action name. And the second argument is basically going to be the state of the input. So state meaning, is the button being pressed down? Is the button being let go? Is it stagnated? Things like that. So this is going to be the input state, and these are the two parameters that matter to us. So in this function, we're going to do 2 checks to make sure that this action is valid. So the first thing we're going to do is check for the action name. So we're going to say if action name equals whatever our action name here is, which is pressed E. We can just say pressed E. And what we're also going to check is the state of the input as well. So we want to do this when the player presses down on the E key. So we're going to say input state equals enum.user input state dot, and as you can see, there's a whole bunch of options. There's about 5 options here. The one we're interested in is begin, which is when we press down on a key or whatever input that we're trying to give into the game. So we're going to say begin, then we can do whatever we want here, which in this case, we could just write a simple print statement by saying player has pressed the E key. Okay, so now finally, we can pass this press E function into our BindAction function from ContextActionService. So we'll just simply say press E, comma, and now we have a third argument here that's called createTouchButton, and this is basically asking, do you want to create a mobile button for the player if somebody is playing on a touch input device like an iPad or an iPhone, things like that. We're going to say true. And finally, the last argument, or infinite amounts of arguments after this, is however many keys you want this action to be valid. So in this case, let's make it the key E, because that's what we're making this BindAction function to be. We're going to activate this when the user presses the E key. So we're going to say enum.keycode.e. So this is basically the entirety of the BindAction function that allows us to give a context of when we can allow the player to press the E key to then fire this function to print player has pressed the E key. I hope this makes sense. This is a very basic example. So let's go into the game and see how this would work in game. All right, so I've loaded into the game. If I press E, then it's going to print down here, player has pressed the E key. However, the problem here now is that this kind of just seems like normal user input service. And that's because we're missing the context part of it. There's no reason for us to just simply do this BindAction function without providing it a context of when we should use the BindAction function. This is just simply saying if the player joins the game or their character exists in the world, then we bind this function here. So there's no reason for us to do this because this action is going to bind no matter what we do. And we're kind of getting rid of the whole reason why we're using ContextActionService in the first place. So what we can do is now provide context to our action that we created. And to further add on to this, there's another function that will be important to us later, but I'm going to show you it right now, and that's called UnbindAction. And this is basically saying if ContextActionService has binded an action, which is our pressed E function, and we don't want the player to be able to press the E key anymore to run this, then we just simply say ContextActionService : UnbindAction. And this only takes in one parameter, this only takes in one argument, which is the action name itself. And as we remember, the action name here is simply called pressed E. So let's pass in pressed E as the argument. And now what this is saying is that when we join into the game, we're going to bind the action that the player can be able to press the E key. But then immediately right after that, we're just going to cancel this. So this script basically means nothing now because we're binding the action and then we're automatically unbinding the action right afterwards. So this is why context matters. And so that's why right now what we're about to do is add context to this to make ContextActionService useful compared to user input service. All right, so I think a really good demonstration of adding context to our key presses is by having a tool where when the player equips the tool, then we're able to press down keys on it that we're not able to if we don't have the tool equipped. So let's create a tool on the right side by going into Starter Pack, hitting the plus sign, and let's create a tool. Now what we'll do is we'll add a handle to it. So let's go to Workspace, hit the plus sign, create a part, and we're going to rename this part to handle, and let's drag this into our tool. So now let's create a local script inside of here by by hitting the plus sign, creating a local script. For our previous local script, let's actually disable this so that this won't be in effect anymore. Let's take ContextActionService, copy it, paste it into here, and let's also copy our press E function, take it into here. But now what we'll do is we'll make it so that when we equip the tool, that's when we'll be able to press the E key with the given context. So let's make reference to our tool. So we're going to drop a line down here and say local tool equals script.parent. And then what we're going to do is drop 2 lines down here and create 2 events. The first one being equipped. So we're going to say tool.equipped connect function, open and close parentheses, enter. And then we're going to do the same thing down here with unequipped. Connect function, open close parentheses, enter. Okay, so for equipped, we want to make it so that when the player has the tool equipped, then we will allow the player to press the E key. So we could go back to our old script, copy our BindAction function right here, and then copy it into our equipped script, into our equipped event. And we can pretty much do the same thing with unbind as well by taking this and copying it and pasting it into our unequipped. That way, when the tool is equipped, we can now provide the right context for the player to press the E key. And if the tool is unequipped, then we're able to unbind the action so that the player will no longer be able to press the E key since the player is not holding the tool anymore. So let's go into the game and see this for ourselves. All right, so as you can see, our tool is down here, but I currently don't have it equipped. So let's press E, and as you can see, nothing is happening when I press E. But now let's equip the tool and see what happens when I press E. So I press E, and now it says down here that player has pressed the E key. I can press this again, and again, and again, and again, but then when I unequip it, the script is going to unbind the action. So when I press E again, then it's not going to print down here because I no longer have the right context to be able to press the E key. So this is how we provide context to our input, to our user input. It's by using ContextActionService. And when you know how to use ContextActionService, this is very effective for user interactivity and user input. Oh yeah, one quick thing I want to add is, you know how I mentioned that for BindAction, we basically have these 3 arguments right here, and then after that, we basically have an infinite number of arguments that tell us how many inputs we want this to be valid for when we activate this function right here. So we can basically add more inputs if we want to on other than the E key. So we would just do that by separating it with a comma by saying comma enum.keycode dot, let's say R. So now what we're doing is for this BindAction pressed E function, we can make it activate by either pressing E or R. And if we want to add in a third argument, we can say enum.keycode.t, and we could just keep going on and on for however many inputs we want this pressed E action to fire from based on user input. So this is a little thing I wanted to add it here in case you wanted to add multiple ways of input for the same exact action. So there's actually another function we can use to bind our actions when we need to do so. And this is going to be called BindActionAtPriority. You might ask what that is. So when we bind actions, let's say for this case, we have BindAction to press the E key in order to fire this function. But now let's say if we had another BindAction that requires us to use this same E key. If we have an E key here and an E key here, then both of these will pretty much bind action to the E key. But what if we wanted to have an order of hierarchy of which bind to press whenever a specific bind action happens over the other one? This is when we have priority over our bind actions by telling us that if we have this bind action to press the E key for this, what if now we wanted to press the E key for something completely different, like a completely different function here that says press E to equip or something, or just a different action in general? We would do that using BindActionAtPriority. There's this little hierarchy of what we want to do in this specific period when we press this certain key. We can do that by using this function, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. So let's get rid of this line over here. We're going to be saying ContextActionService bind action at priority. And this basically has one additional argument, but for the first three, it's basically the same thing. So it's going to have our action name, which is going to be pressed E, and then it's going to have the function that we're going to pass in, which is just going to be press E, and then it's going to ask us whether we want to create a touch button. We're going to say true. And now we have our new argument, which is our priority level. I believe this is a number from 0 to 100. The higher the number is, the more priority that this has over the previous bind action. So if the default is 0, we can say 1 to have a higher priority over the previous one. And then finally, we can pass in any input that we want past this point. So we're going to say enum.keycode.e. Okay, so now we have our BindActionAtPriority here that basically calls this function. But we're not done here yet, because BindAction will have priority over BindActionAtPriority anyways, because we can basically treat regular BindAction as if we're saying this is going to have a priority of 100, like it's going to have the max, because it's not even associated with a priority because it's automatically going to have the biggest priority. So we actually need to replace this with a BindActionAtPriority, and we need to add in a priority of 0 in the fourth argument. So now this is valid. Now we can say that this is going to give us the right results that we want to make this one valid over the previous one. So in order to tell whether this is actually working or not, let's create a new action name inside of our press E function. So we can basically drop 2 lines down here, and we can copy and paste our previous if statement and drop it down here. So let's say if the action name is press E to equip tool, so this will be our new action rather than just pressing E, we're going to say player has pressed the E key to equip the tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace our action name down here with pressed E to equip tool. So both of these now call press E, the function name, the function, but this time we have a different action name for them. And when we press E down here, this one is going to have a higher priority over this one up here with regularly pressing E. So if we press E, it's not going to go to the one that's in here, but instead it's going to go to the one that's down here because this one has a higher priority over the previous one when we press the same key. So I really hope that made sense to you. If it didn't, I encourage you to rewatch this part of the video about bind action at priority, because this is something very important to understand. So let's go into the game now and see our change. All right, so let's equip our tool down here and let's press the E key. So as you can see, player has pressed the E key to equip the tool because we're saying that this one has a higher priority when we press the E key, not the one that's over here. So that's why we're going to skip this one that's over here and go to this if statement instead with this action specifically. If we switch the priority numbers around, so if let's say the regular press E is 1 and then this one is 0, then if we play the game, things are going to be different. It's then going to go to our original pressed E and not the one that's down here, because now this one should have a higher priority over the second one. So now it just says player has pressed the E key. So that is pretty much how bind action at priority works, and I hope that made sense to you. Okay, now you might wonder about the whole create touch button thing that I've been talking about with BindAction up until this point. So I'm going to show you what this create touch button actually is right now. But the first thing we're going to do is comment the second line here with BindAction at priority. And what we will do is we're going to go into the game and we're going to hit test with device emulation. Let's play on some sort of touch device like an iPhone 14 Pro. So let's hit play now and see what the game looks like when we're equipping our tool to be ready to press the E key. Now, what I just said doesn't seem to really make sense because on a touch screen, obviously there's no E key. So what does Roblox decide to do instead? Well, they pretty much just make a button for you to press rather than having to press the E key, because as you know, an E key does not exist on a mobile device or any sort of touch device. So let's equip the tool. And as you can see, Roblox has placed down a little button for us to press rather than having to press the E key as we defined here when we set create touch button to true, because we told Roblox that we wanted to create a button that replaces the need to press the E key if we're on mobile. So if we press this, then it should say player has pressed the E key because this is the only thing that's being called here. It's this action name right here. But this button looks kind of basic. It doesn't have any labels. It's not colorful or anything like that. It's just a basic default button that Roblox has created for us. So now I'm going to show you how to customize this button for touch devices. So for button customization, there's 3 events. There are 3 functions that I think are important to know about. Now, obviously, there's more that you can look at when you go to the documentation for ContextActionService. But for this episode, I'm going to be showing you 3 of them that I think are important. So let's drop a line down here right after we bind our function for pressed E. So we're going to change the way the button looks for this specific action, pressed E. So the way we're going to do that is by using 3 functions from ContextActionService. So we're going to say ContextActionService : and the first one I'm going to show you is changing the title of the button. So what I mean by title is if we, let's say, had the button right here, it's going to have a text on it to let us know what this button does. So that's what the title is, and we're going to set that title. So in our script, let's say set title, and then in parentheses, this takes in 2 arguments. The first one is going to be the action name, which in this case, it's going to be pressed E. So that's our action name right here. And then it's going to take in this a second argument, which is going to be the title itself as a string. We're just going to say press E, just like something random like this, just to let the player know that this is what the button does, so that we can overlay this text in front of the button. So that's one of them. The second one is set image, and this is basically saying we can add a image from the Roblox marketplace to basically slap it onto our button to give us more of a visual representation of the button by just slapping an image onto the actual button. So the way we find an image is, if you remember, it's from the toolbox, which one way you can find it is in view, and then toolbox over here. We can then select an image from the image library. In this case, let's take this red Valk decal. So we're gonna right click it and hit copy asset ID, and then let's go into our script. So we're going to say ContextActionService : set image. And the first thing it's going to take in is the action name, which is pressed E, and then a string that represents the image. So if you remember how an image URL works, it basically starts with this set of strings right here. So in quotations, we're going to say exactly rbx asset ID : // and then our image ID that we copied from our red Valk decal. So we're going to hit paste, and that's going to be our number. So this is the entire image URL right here that's going to change the image of the button. So let's go into the game and see what this looks like now that we changed the title and also the image of it. All right, so let's equip the tool. And as you can see, this little button now says press E, and there's also a little Valkyrie image right behind it. It's kind of hard to see, but you can definitely see it if I zoom in here. So it works as expected, but it's at a very awkward position because it's right in front of the jump button. We can change the position of this using set position, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. So if we go into our script, let's drop a line. Let's say ContextActionService : set position. And first thing is going to be the action name, pressed E, and then a position that takes in a UDIM2 value because we're trying to set the position at a specific spot on the screen. So if you remember how UDIM2 values work, it's basically structured like this. We're going to say UDIM2.new, open and close parentheses, and it's going to take in 4 arguments. We're going to change the scale of this specifically. So we're gonna probably put this somewhere in the middle of the screen just for the sake of this tutorial. We're gonna say 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0. So now we've changed the position of the button to probably a better spot on the screen, or at least somewhere that's not in front of the jump button. So let's go into the game and see the result. Okay, so I had to fidget with the numbers around for a little bit to of a number that's more representable, like -1 for the scale. So now that we're in the game, and I equip the tool, we can see that now the button is at a position that's not where it used to be in front of the jump button. Now, obviously you want to tinker around with this to make it at a much better place. You don't want to have your thumb all the way over here, and then you have to reach for this button with your fingers. It's not very convenient, but just for demonstration purposes, that's how you change the position of a button inside of Roblox Studio with Context Action Service. So I hope this serves to be very useful to you if you decide to use this in your Roblox game. And finally, what we will go over is changing the actual button image itself. So in order to know where this is located, we will go to Players, Brawl Battle, Player GUI, Context Action GUI, Context Button Frame, and then finally we have the Context Action button to then see all of these properties that we can change for an image button. I did not go over what image buttons are, but I will go over that later in my GUI tutorial guide. But just letting you know that this is a image button instance that has all these properties that you can change in order to change the look of your button. So let's say I wanted to change the image color. So if I press this and then change the image color, I can change it to have it to be a tint of, let's say, blue. So now the image has like this bluish color to it. And we can even have an image transparency of it to something different like 0.5 so that it's a little bit harder to see, but it's not entirely opaque. So we can make these little modifications to the button itself if we want to by using a function that Roblox has provided to us called GetButton. And I'm going to show you how to do this in your script. All right, so let's go into our local script, and down here, let's get our button. So we're going to say local button equals context action service get button, and we're going to pass in our action name, which is going to be pressed E. So now that we have our button, let's first check to see if this button exists, because obviously we want this to happen only if we're playing on a touch device. So you're going to say if button then, and then we can change whatever we want to change with the button. So what I showed you before, we changed the transparency of the button, and we also changed the color of it. So we can change the color of it here in our script by saying button.imageColor3 equals color3.from RGB, and then we can click this little wheel here, and then change it to, let's say, this blue color. Let's hit OK. And we can even change the image transparency as well by saying button.imageTransparency equals 0.5. So now if we go into the game, we can see that we've made changes to our button itself because we were able to get the button from the Context Action Service GetButton function. And as you can see, our button here is now blue, and it's also at 0.5 transparency. So this has basically worked as intended. There's one more thing I want to discuss before we end off the video. Now, unfortunately, there is an issue with changing the actual button itself, like this little circular default button here. If we open up the Players, Brawl Battle, Starter GUI, Context Action Service, Context Button, and the actual button itself. So before you leave this video, I want to show you something very interesting that I don't know if you've ever noted, that if you've ever seen this before. But if we have this button image, we can see that it's an ID of 9716444, just like a bunch of random numbers here. If I press the button, then it's going to change the ID to something different. If I let go, then the ID is going to change back to 444. So if I press it, it's going to change the image to something that's a little bit brighter, and then let go, it's going to change it back to something else. So I actually tested this by changing the image to something completely different, like an actual button. So if I search a button, and let's say I took one of these buttons and tried replacing the image, it's just going to be overridden with Roblox's default system of just changing the ID to this default button. And unfortunately, I believe there's no way around this exactly. You're gonna have to use a different framework created by someone that allows you to change the actual button itself. There is a feature for that. I don't exactly know what the name of it is, but if you want to know what it is, I'll probably post it in my resources channel in my Discord server. So if you haven't joined that, I highly recommend you joining my Discord server. All right, and that's basically going to be the end of this episode. I hope you found this video to be extremely helpful to you and that you'll be using this in your Roblox games. If you want to know more about user input and how we can detect user input, and also how we can detect the device that the player is on, I highly recommend you watching my user input service video that I'm going to be putting in right here. So go and watch that if you haven't already. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and if you have, be sure to check out all my other videos that I do have, or check my user input service video that I have recommended to you right here. But with that being said, I'm going to see you in the next episode. Take care.